Hello and welcome to another interview I'm doing in my little series on this. This is the second one. I put out, kind of an invitation to people who had been Catholic traditionalists, and a couple have responded. And I don't really know exactly what their stories are, so it'll be as much of a surprise to me generally as to you. So I'll just have a few people on to discuss their experiences with Catholic traditionalism, and part of the reason I'm doing that is it was a movement I kind of felt like I was part of for a while, and then I've backed away, and I see a lot of people attracted to it, so I kind of feel like it's a good idea to give another side to it, let people see, maybe downsides they wouldn't initially see there. So today I have Cassandra Hackstock with me, and she spent some time in the SSPX movement, quite a few years in that, and so I think she would be a great person to talk to get kind of a picture of what that's like. And so, welcome, Cassandra. Thanks for taking some time to talk to me.
Thanks for having me. I'm very glad that you're talking about this and getting the word out about the darker side to some of these traditionalist groups that look really good at a first glance. Mhm.
Absolutely. And just to get a little sense of kind of how you got into it initially, can you say a bit about kind of what your religious background was that you were raised, and then maybe how that led eventually to you being attracted to the traditionalist movements?
Well, I was about 16 and I had been a Catholic all my life, um, in the Novus Ordo Church or the real church, the actual Catholic Church. And uh, we had started to notice some abuses of the Mass, uh, things like, dancers on the altar and the different words of parts of the Mass that shouldn't be changed, and it was very upsetting to my mother. Um, at that time, my father was not Catholic, so my mom was in charge of everything, kind of on her own, and she was drawn to the old Mass. She remembered her older relatives talking about it as something very, very beautiful. And then she found out that there was an SSPX chapel near our home. Um, it was, I don't know what led to her decision. That was really my decision because I was a minor and I went to Mass where she went to Mass. So, but I know that it had a lot to do with the Mass abuses. And she was persuaded that they were not in schism and that they were, in fact, united to Rome. There was a pamphlet that the society was circulating at the time about that they called the Hawaii Six, if I'm remembering correctly. And this was a pamphlet that talked about some people in Hawaii who were going to a society chapel, and I believe it was their bishop that excommunicated them for that. And but then it was overturned by the Vatican, the excommunications of them. So they used that to kind of persuade us that, see, Rome has no problem at all with us coming to this chapel,
Real quick,
but it was.
if I could
Mhm,
just interject. Some people, I'm sure a lot of them know what SSPX is if they're watching something on traditional
mhm,
Catholicism. But for some who aren't familiar, I guess just to give a real quick is in Vatican II, all these documents that were voted on were like 2100 to 4. And one of the four that would vote against most of the documents was Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. And he ended
mhm,
up splitting and creating this movement called the Society of St. Pius X. And so when you say
mhm.
SSPX, that's what we're talking about. It's this group that's almost too Catholic for the Catholics, and they're not
Mhm,
officially, they don't have faculties from the local bishops or from the Vatican,
mhm,
although kind of like the Eastern Orthodox, their excommunications have been rescinded, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're officially within the church either. So it
mhm.
like Cassandra's saying, it's sort of a hazy thing that they try to say, oh well, we're totally Catholic when it makes sense and when it benefits us, but maybe sometimes we're not if it doesn't, or we disagree with them on something. So yeah,
Mhm.
for if you weren't aware of SSPX, I just wanted to interject that real quick.
Yes, that's very good to do. I forget that not everyone might know the lingo, but I want to say too that SSPX it's a priestly fraternity. So technically, no one is in the society. They also refer to themselves as the society. So no one is in it except for the priests themselves.
Mm.
However, de facto, they're as a they have lay people that will exclusively attend their chapels and live their lives in the SSPX. So I
Yeah,
wanted to make a distinction that when I say I'm in the society, what I mean is I'm attending there. I'm that is my church. I've left the diocesan structure of the Catholic Church behind, and I'm exclusively attending SSPX chapels.
gotcha. Well, it was kind of interesting. You said a couple things that were I hear traditionalists say, but I haven't experienced myself, I guess. One was that there were dancers up on the because that's a lot of times traditionalists will point out, oh, there was these clown masses and there are these
Mhm.
balloons and a priest would ride his Harley down and these abuses that I think were something that happened, but maybe more in the 70s. And but I guess what you're saying is, that is something. And then the other thing you said is that older relatives had said that they thought the old mass was very beautiful, and that's something that
Mhm.
some more traditionalist people will say, yeah, everybody loved it. Maybe not everybody, but they hear people loved it. And I
Mhm.
often hear the opposite side of that too, though, that people back then, there's all these statements collected from people around who are, before these changes were made that hearing, somebody's whispering up there in Latin and it was so frustrating. We never knew what was going on. And so there's also that side of
Mhm.
it. But it's interesting, you specifically experienced kind of what the traditionalists often present as the norm, which is weird abuses happening with dancing and all of that,
Mhm.
and then hearing from relatives
Mhm.
that there's this another option that's beautiful.
Yes, exact. Yeah, absolutely. And the society has very good window dressing. When we first went to the mass there, it's in Latin. They have this sung Gregorian chant. Everyone is dressed modestly, appropriately for mass. There are many young people, many families with lots of children. The confession line is very long, and everyone is very devout and, there for prayer. No one's leaving early. And then, and that really makes a big impression on you when and then this was in the 90s. And, at least at the parishes around my house in the actual Catholic Church, nobody was really going to confession. There'd be a couple of people there, but sometimes the priest wouldn't even come. And it was
Mm.
just kind of exciting to see this world where young people have their rosaries and they're saying their rosaries and it looks fantastic from the outside. But upon immersing yourself into it and being there for 7 years, I, there was a very dark side to that. You don't see it behind the like I just call it the window dressing. The window dressing is
Yeah.
really good, but you don't see the gross dysfunction that's behind that.
Well, I think it's important maybe to give the traditionalists their due and like you're doing and saying
Mhm.
it seems like what a church should be. People are
Mhm.
reverent. People go to confession when they need to. People sing what or say the words during mass that they're supposed to and sing when they're supposed to and everything seems like this is what a church should be compared to people who aren't that serious about it. So I think it's for people like you and I maybe that are now part of the mainstream church, we have to grapple with that there are things about the mainstream church that have a lot of problems too that it would be good if we can encourage a lot of those positives from the traditionalists. They have certain issues with the mainstream church, and then they address them, in their communities like the SSPX, and on those levels, they have some points, that they
Mhm.
have some points. But as you're saying, so you were there for a while. You joined when you're
Mhm.
fairly young. What was that
Mhm.
initial time like? Did you make some good community there, or you get really involved, or?
Well, the first time I went to a mass there, we had to go buy new clothes because, you know, I we wore dresses to the knee, but that wasn't long enough. We had to buy long dresses, and we had to have something to cover our heads at mass. And we didn't have chapel veils yet. So we went to this, and that was fun for me as a 16-year-old. Oh, I'm going to buy new clothes. Isn't this fun to dress up like kind of old-fashioned in an
Yeah.
old-fashioned way? And but then we went to mass the first time, and it was very strange to me. Very strange. And I did not want to go back. Um, I think I must have gone to a low mass first. The low mass, you it's like what you said earlier, it's the whispering where no one knows what's going on. Unless you're following in the missal, which you need to know how to do before you can even follow it. You won't have a clue as what to what's happening. And now people are starting to say that the low mass was never intended to be for a congregation. That was supposed to be just the private mass of the priests themselves. If you were to go to a high mass, that's where you would see like the beautiful mass with the sung chant and the people repeating responses. So I think the first time I must have gone to a low mass, I couldn't understand what was going on. I had a thick missal that I had to flip to 100 pages in to try to get the correct readings, and I didn't know how to do that. And the people were strange to me. they there was something I can't put my finger on why,
Yeah.
but
They're
I just
different. Yeah.
said, Mom, I don't want to go to mass with these weirdos. And she said, we're not going there for the people. We're going there for the mass. And so we'll just, and then she started to get to know people and she said, well, there really are arty types here, artistic types, and that's why maybe their dress is a little weird or you know, and as I got to know people too, I started to love them. Um, I always thought some of the people were still a little strange, but I got to understand that a lot of them were, I mean, you get kind of love bombed, and
Hmm.
to me, what kind of made me change my mind and want to stay there were the arts. Um, the kids, the girls and boys in the junior high school were putting on Shakespeare,
Hmm.
unedited, memorized, and acted really well. And I got to be a part of that, and it was incredible. And I got, people would talk to you about history and art and music and literature. And I thought, okay, so they're a little weird on the outside, but I've never had this opportunity in my life to be able to be involved in the arts this way. The art class was making stained glass for the chapel windows and things
Yeah.
like that. Maybe not glass, but I'm sorry, they were making like painted icons
Gotcha.
and things
Yeah.
like that.
I think what you say about the people might be a little odd, but um, there's so much to their spiritual life and their intellectual life and their creative life. I've
Hmm.
always I've always enjoyed people like that, I guess. I just, and that's one thing I like about, interacting with various groups of people, even that I don't agree with. Like even if I'm fairly conservative, I, have friends that are more liberal and have interesting ideas and creative endeavors. And I've
Hmm.
found that interesting about a lot of the traditionalists. Maybe one of the reasons that I was drawn to them is a lot of them they know literature, they know art, they know history and cultural things. And, I
Yes.
think that's of such value. And that is something that can be lost if you have sort of a half-hearted faith and a half-hearted religion, then you don't bring kind of the fullness of all that. Um,
Hmm.
and I think what was it from Braveheart? When Robert the Bruce's dad was saying, don't join, you need to kind of betray the Scots and go with the English royals. And he said he wanted to go with, Mel Gibson's character. And he's like, well, uncompromising men are easier to admire. I think that kind of, sometimes the people who seem like they have the pure version, that uncompromising attitude,
Hmm.
you're like, it's, you can respect that because they're really trying to live out fully without compromising to the modern world. If the modern world has problems, so yeah, it's an
Hmm.
attractive thing. I think probably why both of us were drawn to it. But
Yeah, yeah, it's exciting to be in a crowd like that for the first time and to know that your friends are going to meet you at mass and not just sleep in. And so there's a lot that attracts people. But sadly, there's a very, very dark side to it too. And you don't
Um,
find that out until you've been in it for a while. And then, people's lives are ruined
so real
sometimes.
quick, did you go to one particular SSPX chapel or did you go to different ones? Have you experienced like multiple or?
I have experienced a few, mainly in Armada, Michigan. There was it's in Ray Township now, Michigan, St. Joseph Chapel, which was really that was the first chapel they built in America, and the older people in the church would be they hosted the mass in their garage at first until they could afford to build the church. Um, but I went to retreat in California at the retreat center in Los Gatos, and I've been to other chapels around the country because I had friends and I visited, and in the society, you can go wherever you want. There's always an SSPX chapel to hire you off the street or and welcome you in, stay with the family, be a nanny. I mean, it's really good if you like to travel too. So, but
Interesting.
my biggest experiences were with California and Michigan.
The first Latin mass I went to was in Michigan too. I could kind of tell you're from
Really?
Michigan with your accent, but yeah, I was in college at a Protestant college before I was Catholic, and
Oh,
somebody there invited me to go to a Catholic mass, and I just assumed it would be a typical one, but it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and
oh,
it was a Latin mass. I don't know what it was, like if it was diocesan
hmm.
or SSPX or the guys who invited me were twins, Italian twins that were very
Oh.
uh, very traditionalist, and it probably actually started me down a road that eventually maybe become Catholic.
Wow, that's
But yeah.
wonderful.
So let me ask, when did you start to see kind of some red flags? Like after you had that initial, sounds like you might have had some uncomfortable elements from the very beginning in terms of
Hmm.
the mass was a little odd, the people were a little odd, and it took some getting used to, but you did like a lot of what you saw. But what were the elements
Hmm.
that maybe started to be red flags like, this doesn't seem right.
There were some things I was never able to accept fully. We always had dressed modestly in my family, but I didn't understand why women couldn't wear pants. Um, and they were described as to a parishioner excuse me, they were described by a parishioner there. They don't use that word parishioner, but it's a de facto parishioner. He described them as pornographic, and I couldn't accept. I thought that was very strange in my head. There's a long way between pants and pornography, even if they are tight pants. And my mother would never let us wear tight pants. I didn't understand that, and I didn't understand what they were preaching about women and men. Um, they they from the pulpit would tell us that women are emotional and not rational, flighty, um, kind of sanguine, and men were only rational, not emotional at all, and must rule their families to the point where our pastor preached from the pulpit that if your husband tells you you have to make mashed potatoes for dinner, you must make mashed potatoes. It's the end of it. And
Yeah.
I was very troubled by that. It sounds ridiculous now,
No,
but
yeah,
there was a parish, a group of maybe 150 of us sitting there listening to that, and it was very strange,
it's
upsetting to me.
very different than the culture we're in for sure. Um,
Yeah.
and just, I don't know, I was thinking of like the compatibilism of, men have strengths and women have strengths and there are
Mhm.
differences, but it always seems like if you try to make those differences rules, then you get in, there's natural ways
Mhm.
that people are, but they don't always line up that way. There's exceptions
Right.
where some men are more feminine and some women are more masculine. But if you try to make those yeah, those differences that are on average true into like strict
Hmm.
rules, then you get into
Yes.
really, really making life difficult for people, that adding extra difficulties, I guess, to marriages. And
Yes.
did you see kind of how do people deal with that kind of a mandate on their marriage?
Hmm. They tried to live it, and that's a fundamental weakness of the SSPX because these people were mass goers, devout, frequent reception of the sacraments, and they tried to live what the parish priests would say. Um, and it caused a lot of hard marriages, very troubled marriages, which you don't see because they're not divorcing. So you go to mass and you see them in the pew with 7, 10, 12, 13 children, and they're all at mass together and it looks fantastic. But what you don't see, and I've known this in a three households I can think of off the top of my head now, and I'm sure there are more out there, but marriages that were broken, the people hating each other, the husband and wife hating each other, but living in the same house, and it almost creates this domestic hell that the children are raised with the parents that hate each other, but they're not divorcing. Um, the the priest told the men, you can't be emotional because emotion is weak and unreliable, which made it worse that they were describing us women as emotional and so weak and unreliable. But so the men would feel like they couldn't express emotion and they shouldn't. They needed to
Yeah.
be strong men ruling their families. And oh,
I was going to say on the
I'm sorry.
divorce question,
Mhm.
I don't think the mainstream church would suggest they divorce either, but it's just
No.
they would probably get them into counseling if the man was being
Yes.
ruling with an iron fist, ask him to, to more be in a cooperative leadership, in a more cooperative and compatible sense. But yeah, I
Mhm.
mean,
They
I've
wouldn't know.
seen that as well, and they might confide in their friends that yeah, we haven't had much of a relationship in a long time, and yeah. So sorry, but you continue on the male and female dynamics, I guess.
Mhm.
Did that impact your own story there, or did you
It
how
it
that was thought
did.
of?
It did. It made me troubled in my soul. We would never have come to the SSPX if we hadn't believed with all our hearts that this was in union with the church and this was what we were supposed to be doing. And even knowing that, but then hearing things that seem very wrong at the same time, it kind of creates a turmoil in the soul. I couldn't really put my finger on what was wrong, but my heart was disturbed. The men of the parish are are very close to alcoholism. If you see them in their leisure time, the men are all together drinking in someone's barn or garage or basement, being real men because we need community, we need brotherhood. And I see some of that reflected in this alpha male trend that has been going on in the pop culture lately. But they drink and they together, and the women are pretty much left with the large family on their own, and the women are all together at the picnics and the get-togethers, and they're in the house complaining about the men, and there's no unity, and no charity and no love. It's all, one woman I knew, her she had a nervous breakdown because she had 10 or 12 children. A few of them were her husband's and a few of them were hers. And when they got married, they were both widowed. And then they had some more of their own. The oldest boys were out of control. She couldn't manage them, and they were not her biological children, they were her husband's. And she had a nervous breakdown, and the whole church turned on her. Like she was just crazy. There's something wrong with her. And that really was disturbing to me. Her husband was an alcoholic, drank with his friends all the time. She couldn't handle it, and as a result, her daughter in eighth grade at the SSPX school was pulled out of school for months at a time to raise the babies as an eighth grader. She's missing her education, and she's got to support her mother who has no other support. That those are the kind of stories you could, I mean, I could tell you 15 stories like that of people, and that they were my closest friends and my relations also. And that's kind of how I know their stories. I've known more than one family whose wife has fled in terror because her husband is about to kill the family,
Yeah, I
living
guess
in the.
it seems like maybe like we're saying with there's some problems in the mainstream church with certain
Mhm,
things, and I think a lot of people who are attracted to traditionalism, they might see those problems of maybe there's not enough um, focus on family and marriage and having a some children. You don't need 13 necessarily, but
mhm,
just having
mhm,
a real family focus, and maybe modern life doesn't value those things quite as much. So then they maybe go to another extreme of
mhm,
we're gonna find maybe not even what the church teaches, but maybe what it norms were socially in another era,
well,
and
what they
cling to
think
that.
those
And
norms.
it's sort of like you're not you're not splitting the difference necessarily or trying to find a balance. You're sort of flipping from one extreme to another, and
Yes.
that can be there's not necessarily a healthy place there, especially if you don't take both partners mental health and what they're capable of. If somebody's pushed to their breaking point
Mhm.
and then past it, and everybody's like, well, you couldn't, this was your role and you failed at your role, then that can
Yeah.
be, you know everybody else who's watching that, all the other women watching that are probably like, well, that's what happens if I don't fulfill my role, is I'll be sort of tossed out of everybody's good graces. And so
Yes.
did you say
Yes.
you were not married in SSPX, but you had got close to it, or
Well, I started to date someone, and I wouldn't really have been interested in him, but my mom just said, "Why don't you just give him a chance? Get to see if you can get to know his personality." So I went out with him a few times, and he was a very nice man, but I didn't feel compatibility at all on, I in any way, from a personality standpoint, and even from a faith standpoint. Even though we were both in the SSPX, his family had been in it maybe from the beginning of them building the chapel in Michigan, but they were very entrenched in the SSPX, and he believes something that many of them do believe, which is that if you cannot, by some impediment, you cannot get to an SSPX mass on Sunday, you should not go to a Novus Ordo church. You should just stay home and say your rosary. And that was something that bothered me a lot. That was another one of those little things that troubled me because I never believed that. I, I tried to pinpoint a priest about that to say, I said, are you, are you saying that the regular mass at the Catholic Church is wrong? And he wouldn't come out and say it. He couldn't just say it directly, but they will kind of skirt the question by saying, well, it's a danger to the faith.
but a lot of
So
the people have that opinion, including this gentleman.
yes, yes. And I thought, well, he doesn't know in my head all of the reservations that I have about the society, even though I'm attending it. And I don't think we can make a marriage work based on lack of attraction, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. And so, but there was like this big pressure campaign for me to marry him. And it came from my family, who were all in the SSPX chapel with me, and the parishioners, and even our pastor, who told me, just marry him. you'll grow to love him after you're married. And it was very upsetting to me. And I didn't feel like I had anybody to help me, really. Um,
It's almost like an
so
arranged
it was
marriage. Like
kind of, it was like,
everybody
well, you're
decided
both,
these two people should be married, and then
yeah, that's what it felt like. It felt like, well, you're both like marriageable age and single. So all right, you guys get married now. And that's, most people did marry within the chapel. And it was kind of a closed society in that way. They didn't want to marry outsiders. So that was very hard. I will say that there was a younger priest who had just come, and he didn't seem to have that hardness of heart that some of the more entrenched people had. To put it bluntly, at the time, I felt he was more normal than some of them. And he was the only I went to see him and talked about the situation with him, and he said, if you no, you can't live together for 45, 50 years and make a marriage work if you don't have, you're not on the same page in any way. And I was so happy because he was the only one that stuck up for me. And even though it wasn't publicly, he privately encouraged me enough to where I could break it off with the man um and feel good about it. It
gotcha.
was very hard. Yeah.
Um, were there sort of repercussions among people, or was it like, okay, she just doesn't want to, we'll leave her alone about it?
There was just universal disappointment among everybody, but I didn't mind because I had that one person in my corner, so I just it was good. It was a very good decision. And he ended up getting married to another woman in the society. They have a big family. He has everything he wanted. And I left this SSPX when I was 24. So if I had had that, if we had been married and I would have had that desire to leave, that would have been that would have been very challenging to a marriage. So it turned out to be the right decision.
It's almost like a interreligious marriage, even though you'd both be Catholic, if you had decided to
Yes,
go to, I don't even like the term Novus Ordo because I think it was more popularized by people in the traditionalist movement, whereas the church
yes,
calls it the ordinary form of the Roman Rite, and
yes.
then there's the extraordinary
Mhm.
form. So sometimes I'll say Novus Ordo and catch myself like it's the ordinary form, where the other one's the not ordinary form.
Yes,
The past
that's
form, there's been
right.
so, but yeah, if you were to go to the ordinary form of the mass, then it probably would almost felt like a interreligious marriage where
Oh, yeah.
because yeah, he would have been like, that's not okay. But I'm curious. So, from your time, I guess you haven't been there in a little while, but do you get the sense
In
that
a while.
it's like a growing movement and there's still SSPXs and growing because I feel like online they're very successful at attracting people by making that contrast where the Novus Ordo is all clowns and balloons and abuses and people who don't
Hmm.
really care about religion, and then we're Gregorian chant and Knights Templar and people who actually do care. And
Yeah.
they draw that contrast, and a lot of people, especially Gen X men, I see they're like, I'm going to become Catholic and I'm going to be a traditionalist. They
Hmm.
convert almost to traditionalist Catholicism rather than just the mainstream
Yes.
church. So I don't know if you saw, you know, if it seemed like a growing movement when you were there, or maybe that happened more after.
Well, that's one of the things that they're deceptive about. There was a great deal of deception about who they were, which led us to go there and stay there. And one of the deceiving things is that, yes, people always came in. There were always new people, but there were also people leaving. And so it was a revolving door. I said it before, it was kind of like a closed society, and it is if you're attending for people who are just attending the services there. But it is a revolving door of who that membership is. They don't focus on all of the people who are fleeing from traditionalism, not just in the SSPX, but all across our society. Protestant traditionalism or fundamentalism, other, groups like that. there it's it's not growing because of the vast numbers also leaving it.
Yeah.
They're not just coming, they're leaving too. They get a taste of it and it starts to affect their marriages and their children and their souls.
I think that's one. I mean, you don't hear a lot of people defend Vatican II and talk about it being great, but I really think people should because one of the benefits, you
Mhm.
mentioned a lot of people leaving traditionalism. Um, One of the benefits of Vatican II is it was able to take a lot of the core doctrines and kind of hold on to them and reframe them a little bit, but hold on to
Mhm.
the what is core to Catholicism while taking into account a bunch of things that maybe people had um, that had become more clear about way humanity works, about science, like Dave Verboom, the Vatican II document
Mhm.
on how to interpret Scripture opens up. You can look at the different books as a different literary style, so it doesn't all have to be taken literally. So now evolution's acceptable, and now
Mhm.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
the brilliance of Vatican II was taking into account that yes, some people are abandoning religion altogether, and especially traditional forms, well, including traditional forms, but there's other people who are looking for something stable and something that has tradition and a heritage to it. And I really think they
Mhm.
threaded the needle on it. It hasn't maybe after every council they say it takes a while to implement in kind of a coherent way. So maybe this will take another
Mhm.
bunch of decades or even a century, and then everybody will look back. Oh yeah, Vatican II, that was definitely necessary. That so it could take a while for it because that is said to have happened with other councils, but it
Mhm.
seems like a big part of why SSPX exists is to resist some of those, um, you know, not changes in dogma, but changes in maybe some of the ordinary magisterium that is allowed to change because it's not infallibly declared. But
Mhm.
they will resist a lot of that and prefer older ways of looking at things. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that with maybe how they saw Vatican II and things like a more hopeful view
Mhm.
of salvation or a different view on a whole host of things, but not
Mhm.
just the language of the mass. There's a lot more underneath, I think.
There is a lot more underneath it. First about Vatican II, I think there were two big groups of people who misunderstood it. And one group was that group that left the church altogether because they, that fell away from the church, which is giving the SSPX fuel for their existence. Um, I don't think anyone left the church because of Vatican II if they understood it, if they read the documents, if they understood it in the light of faith and in the light of tradition. But it was misunderstood. And after every council in the church, there's been a period of turbulence after the council because some people can't accept it. I think there are the old Catholics of America, or they may have changed their name, but they left after Vatican I because they couldn't accept papal infallibility. So it's not like Vatican II is this, climactic moment, and it is a climactic moment in salvation history, but it's not a climactic moment that resulted in the church just apostatizing, which is kind of what the SSPX feels. They, the youth in the SSPX don't they're never taught anything about what the popes of the council and afterwards taught. Nothing. No encyclicals, no letters, no quotes. They're taught about them as that they're wrong, they're evil, they're misguided, and they're ruining the church. But they don't they have no framework to be able to combat that in their own minds because they've never been exposed to them. So the SSPX says we're under the Pope. And if I listened when I first started going there, I listened to the canon of the Mass, and they did say his name in the Eucharistic prayer, and they did say the name of the local ordinary bishop in the Mass. So I thought, okay, good, they're that's true. But after I started to realize they they despise those popes and even though they're saints now, the SSPX has a hard time saying that they're saints. They say those canonizations were very problematic. Um, they, they don't, they follow the Pope in that they believe he is validly elected, unlike the Sedevacantists who believe that there is no legitimate Pope. So the SSPX believes that the Pope is a legitimate Pope. It's just that he's wrong, and they've been leading the faithful into error since Vatican II. Um, and and what led up to the council. There's so many things I could say about um, the Vatican Council and the SSPX. I don't know where to start
Sure.
really.
I guess what would you say the impact of them rejecting some of that is? Like if I think Pope Francis used this term like indiatrismo or something that people call it rigidness. It's like
Hmm.
being rigid in your thinking and not willing to, oh, if you're trying to reconcile these two ideas, we do that with the Bible all the time, where you have this verse, and they seem to contradict, and then you find ways to
Yes.
reconcile the two. And
Hmm.
Vatican II sought to do that, and prior councils also sought to do that, where you have, well, we believe this, and we also believe that. It seems like the rigidity makes it a little more like, um, we're not going to accept any way of reconciling these two ideas. And
Yes. And
it,
that's
yeah,
one thing that led me to leave the SSPX was that we will not serve. They said that about I think it was Father Franz Schmidberger who, who said that about the talks with Rome. This is getting ahead of the story, but just going back to Vatican II for a minute, the rigidity is there. It's a very strong focus on following the letter of the law, with very rigidly. Um, you must obey these little rules, and it seems like the longer I was there, the more rules they thought up. Somebody came up with something that was done in this or that century, and so now that's a rule that we all must do. And so it kind of kept me off my footing a little bit. Like, you know, they one of the biggest things about the SSPX is their image of God. Their image of God is not who God is. And he's a tyrant. He loves us in kind of an abstract way. He loves us enough to have created us and to redeem us so that we may go to heaven. But if we can't be perfect in then we will lose heaven. And it was I don't want to repeat myself. Have I said that about the
no,
preaching of from the pulpit that we would see most people at the judgment day going to hell? Most people. And that and so it just it causes religious scruples among the parishioners. I had religious scruples to the point where I would leave the confessional and feel like I had done it wrong, and I had to like get back in line and try to do a better one. And it it, it fosters anxiety. um I started to have panic attacks during mass for the first time. And by the grace of God, now I'm 47, and just recently I've been able to go to mass without panic attacks. I still struggle with religious scruples. I'm using myself as an example, but
sure.
I'm not the only one. This is a pattern in the SSPX.
And
We're
honestly,
terrified of God.
that was my experience. That's probably why I stopped thinking of myself as a traditionalist. Is I got such scruples. There was no way, because so many things are on a spectrum, where I'd go to one priest and like, oh, if you had 3 drinks, that's fine, but four, it's definitely that's a mortal sin. And other than be like, oh, you had
Yes.
six, that's a mortal sin, or that's fine. So
Mhm.
each thing, there's so many things that are on a spectrum, and there's so many priests with different things, but it's not something that you can casually shrug at if being wrong is an eternity of torment. It's really
Yes,
hard to,
exactly.
you can't,
Yes.
and they try to kind of gaslight you on it, where it's like, oh, you're overthinking it, you're being scrupulous, but it's
Mhm.
like, on what other thing, like, even if it was just torture on Earth for like a year or something. If I was
Yeah,
trying to figure out exactly, okay, so you're saying if I take a wrong turn here, I'll get tortured for a year, and if I don't, you would want to know the exact parameters of what
exact
would and would not.
parameters.
And
Yes,
the fact that there aren't a lot of times, of course, it's going to lead to scruples. Like
it does. Yes,
how could I be indifferent to that or just shrug it off?
yes.
Like, so I think
And
somewhat
they,
it can almost give them power because by them being the
Mhm.
one who gets to define it, I always have to, you have to come to them. So I think the more emphasis on hope and on following your conscience. Like if I really look at my conscience and I say, I think I'm doing the right thing, then that matters. That I'm being
Yes,
guided, but I'm also, I think it takes much more seriously the other 2 points of a mortal sin, which are full knowledge and complete assent
yes.
of the will. Full and complete are pretty high bars. And I feel like in some of those, they put
Hmm.
those full and complete bars really low, where it's like almost if you look
Yes, yes.
at a woman for 3 seconds, that might be okay, but 10, now you're going to hell. It's hard to
Hmm.
know on a spectrum at any point
Yeah,
where my eternal salvation has just been lost. So obviously you want to get right
right.
back into line or so
Exactly.
yeah, I
Yes.
had a I had a similar experience with scruples, but you continue. I
Yes.
didn't mean to get off
Oh
track there.
no, no, that's fascinating. I'm glad that we've both come out and are in a healthier place spiritually because, God was only the judge to them. The mercy of God was and the love of God was that someone would admonish you and tell you you were a sinner and you were going to go to hell if you don't stop it. And that's mercy. And if you don't, from that point, amend your life perfectly on your own, you're going to go to hell. And that is not a Catholic teaching. That's a heresy. God loves us like again with God's image of a father and with the image of that the SSPX father is. This is another big reason why people in the SSPX don't understand. They only know their father as a cold, distant tyrant who isn't concerned with their life in many ways at all.
Maybe the
How
worst
can
version of that I see is like the Thomist or Augustinian idea of reprobation or predestination to heaven or election, where it's very similar to Calvinism, where
Yes.
God just made you. I mean, according to Augustine, massa damnata, he made the vast majority of people with no intention of giving them the grace necessary, to go to
Yes.
heaven. And I just was like, I cannot accept that. Like there's something inside me that just I can't accept the thing that he's good and he's love and he's mercy and also that.
Hmm.
Those just don't
Yeah.
compute in my mind. And some people are like, well, you're
Yeah.
taking it too much of an emotional level. I'm like, no, that's just a logical. Those things just don't fit logically to me.
They're
And
not
thankfully, there's a
compatible.
lot of other ways to look at it.
Yeah, thank God for that. And it does create this turmoil in the soul. And I could never put my finger on, I couldn't ever resolve it. So it just kept disturbing me more and more over the years until I was able to leave.
Can you say more
The
about that? Like, what was the red line that you're like, okay, I'm out of here, unless there's more to say about before that.
well, I think we've covered a lot, and I could talk about this for ages,
Sure.
but I just about God, I by the grace of God, I found great healing in the actual Catholic Church. And I know now that God is a father, but our human image of a father is very troubled in today's world. And so we have to understand father as it is in God, which is as it should be. A loving, intimate relationship with the father, not in a master slave relationship, but in a relationship where he's intimately concerned with every minute of our lives. He isn't going to, like, if it's in the Bible, I can't remember the verse. If he clings to me, I will deliver him. And that's what we have to do. We have to cling to God, and he will heal us from these faults. We are not on our own to work out. I mean, yes, it says to work out your own salvation in fear and trembling, but that isn't alone. That's with God. And I've noticed that in my own life, He's given me opportunities to atone for things. And they aren't, like I said, 15 rosaries with my arms above my head. It's like He puts me in a similar situation and lets me make a better choice.
Yeah.
One thing I always was guilty about was smoking because I was the oldest in my family, and you know, I smoked when I was 16, and the other kids, all my other siblings followed suit. And I felt terribly guilty about that. But then, he gave me nieces and nephews and helped me to quit smoking. And those nieces and nephews have never seen me smoke. And that's kind of how God is. He is not going to allow us to be lost and damned if we cling to Him, not in fear, but in love. So
The
I
prodigal
just
son, I
can't.
feel like that prodigal son story is a much better if God Jesus gave us that image of what it's like, for the father and what it's like for the son. I think that dynamic is
Mhm.
pretty clear. It's not the prodigal son leaves and squanders his gifts, and then the father hates him. It's more natural
Yeah.
consequences of sin are that when you're away from
Hmm.
God, it's awful. And he runs. I think a key part of it is he runs out to meet the son on the road.
Yes. And
So
he's
he's
looking for
not
him.
begrudgingly like sitting there like, if you come back, maybe I'll forgive you. He's running out to down the road to find you.
Yeah. And that's the older brother, the other brother. The other brother's looking at him like that. And that's our
Yes.
example of what not to do in that situation.
Yes.
So, and just one more thing too, the society starts to eliminate all of the other power structures in society so that they are the only power left. They, of course, they will continually badmouth the actual Catholic Church in its structure and the popes, of course. But they also will do that for the medical establishment. They don't believe in the medical establishment, or maybe just a little bit sparingly. Um, they don't believe in medicine. They don't believe in counseling or psychology. I mean, he wasn't in the society, but a traditionalist priest told me that, more that mental illness is just an excuse for sin. It doesn't exist. You just need to go to confession and then you'll be fine. And if you're not fine, then what? Then there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you.
It kind of reminds me of the Amish. Um, I I was really interested in the Amish for a while. I wrote an article for
Mm.
Crisis Magazine. I don't know if you know Crisis Magazine.
Yes,
Um,
I do.
I used to write sometimes for them when I was more traditionalist, but kind of
Mhm.
laying out like why their vision of things is great. And I think it would line up probably with SSPX on there. I
Yeah.
saw some of those kind of people share the article.
Mhm.
They're prominent,
That's a
but
very
it
big
reminded me of
yeah.
the way they try to eliminate all of the other structures, and it's just
Hmm.
family often, and they don't really trust
Yeah.
medicine or counseling, and so a lot of things
Mm-mm.
I idolize that as like I think they have it figured out, but I mean the sexual abuse that goes on in their community that doesn't get
Yes.
reported is horrific. There's been stories on that, and just
Yeah.
people that are they don't get educated. They don't see what the world has to offer fully. They don't get to, roles and institutions and culture are important, but if you can't question it or break outside it, they will, shun you a lot of times if you break
Yes.
out of a
Yes.
mold in Amish society. So a lot of that, looking at it now as more of a mainstream Catholic, I'm like, actually, there's a lot wrong with with that level of traditionalism, But
Yes, there really is. There is. And it's like that too. You don't really associate with your family that aren't in the SSPX anymore. Or you might, but you're secretly judging them the whole time because of all the choices they've made. And then too with America, they're really anti-American. It's, there's a lot, you know, they focus on, well, it was founded by Protestants and Deists and Masons.
and
And
Jews.
so, yeah, yeah, I know this obsession with the Jews. Yes. And they're always to blame for everything. And so you can't trust America either, and they totally bypassed the vast part of our country that was founded by the Jesuits, the French and the
Mhm.
Spanish, and many religious orders. And okay, yeah, New England, but it's kind of like that. It's just an extreme. So they get rid of all the power structures, and then they're the only ones left. If you leave them, you're lost. And
Yeah.
so what do you do? Where do you go to when, I mean, you've been taught for many years that all of those other things are evil and wrong. And one of the joys of leaving them was to understand that they're not. People are still good outside of the SSPX, not just in a wishy-washy kind of kind, but will secretly lead you to your doom way, but like in a real way. There's still a lot of good in our country and
Yeah.
in our society.
I think
So
that's one of the beauties of the post-Vatican. One of my favorite encyclicals is Pope Benedict XVI Spe Salvi, which is, I guess, hope saves. But he talks about how
yes.
there is a level of goodness and love and openness to truth, even if it's not to the level of, being pure. It's enough where he
Mhm.
says, and for that reason, he supposes, so it wasn't dogmatic or anything, but he supposes that
Mhm.
most people are not so pure that they'll jump straight to heaven or have so little love that they'll go to hell. But the vast
Yeah.
majority, it was almost I think a rebuttal to the Massa Damnata almost. It was like,
Oh yeah.
he used a term like, therefore the vast majority will go to purgatory on their kind of way just to
Mhm.
be cleansed a bit. But,
On their
you
way.
see that just walking around, I think people
Hmm.
who are an atheist or a person who's maybe disagrees with me a lot, but then I see them showing genuine love to their kids or to,
Yes.
you know, in a tragedy, a lot of times the people who show up I see are people who very much disagree with me politically. And
Yes.
it's like they have genuine love in them. They have genuine goodness. And,
They
you
do.
know, it was a verse about everyone who loves is born of God. You have, so
Yes.
I think if you draw such strict black and white lines between my group and everybody else, you can miss a lot
Hmm.
of that. That
You do. Yes, you do. You miss so much good in people. And I've heard it said that, well, everybody in the world's heard of the faith of God, of Christ. So it's all their fault if they're going to be damned because they've heard about him. Like,
the
well, you
invincible
don't
ignorance.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, but if you're born and raised a devout Hindu, and then somebody, you read about Christ casually in a magazine or newspaper, and you're not going to renounce your entire way of life to become a Christian because you
Yeah,
don't know. You haven't had a true encounter face to face with Christ, which
exactly.
is what we're called to be to people in the world. But the people in the SSPX, they would they would come to you. I mean, after we left, a friend came to my dad and just said, I think you're wrong, and I think this is going to be very bad for you, and I think, you're endangering your salvation by leaving. And he was doing that. They're all sincere. At least on the level of, the people in the pews. I can,
Yeah.
they're
But
sincere.
go ahead, sorry.
Oh, but anyway, but it's kind of like this cold, like, you're sinning, you're going to go to hell. And you're supposed to then say, change your entire life according to what they say. And that's really
Yeah.
not what converts people.
And I think as in the Old Testament, you see multiple times, and even in the New Testament, where Paul says, I would gladly, you know, be doomed forever to save my brothers in the Jewish world. And Moses did a similar thing where he said, "You can strike me down, and to save everybody else." I think there's a mindset of somebody who truly has the love of God in them, where they're looking for paths for everybody to be saved. They're looking for hope for everybody. They're looking for excuses for everybody.
Yes.
When somebody does the opposite, I'm always very skeptical of their motives. If they're looking for
Yeah.
ways that everybody's damned, or looking for ways
Right.
around a verse
Right.
that or something a pope says that suggests it, instead of being like, oh, that's interesting, that would be great. I really am going to hope and pray for that because the catechism says, directly, in hope we pray that all men shall be saved. But they'll be like, no, no, it doesn't mean that though. What it really means is, and it's like, why are you looking for more ways, possible ways that everybody could be tormented for eternity. Like, shouldn't we be
Yes.
hoping and praying for even, your friend that disrespected you and you don't like him anymore? And
Hmm.
shouldn't you still, if you have love within you, think, well, I hope God will heal that and make whatever God intended when he made that person, that can flourish. But so it makes me very
Yes.
skeptical of people when they have sort of the other motive that way.
It's so true. It's so true. We make excuses for, and in love, love is seeing the good in other people and making excuses for why they should be saved. And I have to feel that God is pure love, perfected, or not perfected, but or perfected from all eternity in himself. But he's going to be way better about that than even we are. And I feel like he knows our hearts, and he's not looking for ways to condemn us. Like, oh, you just missed the bar. Sorry.
You
Can't do
had four
anything.
drinks instead of three, and
Yes,
yeah, no.
yes.
I mean, I hope
Yeah.
not. I don't really. It's a confusing planet we're on. We're just kind of dropped here
Oh, yes.
without a instruction manual. So who knows? Maybe God is like that, and I just don't know. But it doesn't make sense to me that
Yeah.
he'd be like that. But
It isn't logical to believe that. If you believe the entirety of tradition and the Bible scripture and tradition together. And that way, the traditionalists are actually less traditional than the regular, ordinary form of the Mass in the Catholic
mhm.
Church.
Saying, I guess, just a little bit about what happened when you left. What I guess what made that happen? If
Hmm.
there was like one, it was just a combination of things, and there's no real story there. Fine, but if there was some instigating incident, and then kind of where have you been led since that, and what was the transition like?
Yes. Well, for me, I was 24, and I, at this point, had been teaching for the SSPX, and they paid for my apartment with some of the other single female teachers. And, I was entirely immersed in them. And the further I went in and, you know, got to the kind of the, what do they call it, inner circle, like it was kind of like the more disturbed I began to be in my soul. And then the talks began. I was 24, so it had been 2001, I believe. There were talks between the society and Rome, which have been going on and off for, since the 70s anyway. But I was very hopeful that, oh, okay, good. Now it can be what they would call regularized because they don't believe that they're schismatic. But they still understand that their situation needs to be regularized within the church. Well, then I believe it was Father Franz Schmidberger, who was the superior general at the time of the SSPX in America, came to our chapel to give a talk and about the talks with Rome. And I went and I was very excited. And he said, I just want to, tell you all about the Vatican talks because, and I want to allay your fears. He said, you don't have to worry about these talks because we're not going back to Rome. And I was crushed. I'm like, you mean everybody else here is not excited to go back to Rome? They're all upset about it. And I may be, I want to credit it properly. Part of this might be from Bishop Fillet also, because he gave a lecture at the time. I wasn't in attendance, but so between Bishop Fillet and Bishop and Father Schmidberger, who both gave talks around the same time about the meetings with, and they said we're not going back to Rome. You don't have to be worried about that. And I was shocked because I thought everyone would be as excited to have our situation regularized as I was. But instead, they were there to allay the fears of the other mass goers. And then they said, it's not about even about, the Latin Mass. They could let us say the Latin Mass, they could do whatever, but we're not going back to Rome because we will have to then do what they say. And we won't be able to go it our own way anymore. And that struck me as we will not serve. That's exactly what it sounded like to me in my heart. And I thought, the regular priests of the ordinary form are all telling us we cannot go here. But they're the to the SSPX, but they're the ones who have been committing these mass abuses. The SSPX is telling us we can't go there. And this is before the internet. So I have no access. There are no books about this in our library. There's no internet. And how do you believe? So I said, I'm going to go back and I'm going to read the letters back and forth between Archbishop Lefebvre and the Vatican and see what led up to this splitting
Oh,
off.
I have not done that. That
And
sounds interesting.
oh, it was illuminating. And now in the SSPX, they taught us that they're not really excommunicated. Some officious Curia member wrote a letter of excommunication, and they didn't have the authority to do that, and it was invalid. So
There's always
there's oh my goodness,
a
and they can
clause.
quote canon law to you and make it very believable, but it's not the fullness of the law. It's taken out of context. So anyway, at the time, this is ironic because it was the SSPX that published all those letters back and forth between uh, Archbishop Lefebvre and the Vatican. It was their book.
Thank you.
I
Convenient, you know.
Yes, and they okay. So as I was reading, first of all, the letters were to then Cardinal Ratzinger, and
Hmm.
I was thinking, well, he's the head of the CDF. This is not a low level Curia member who took it upon himself to excommunicate them. This is Cardinal Ratzinger. And I was reading the letters, and they looked exactly to me like Cardinal Ratzinger, with the knowledge and approval of then Pope, now Saint John Paul II. They were in good faith. They were offering him what he wanted. And Archbishop Lefebvre's letters were condescending and suspicious and rude, rejecting their efforts and twisting their words. And I got to read it all for myself. And the Angelus Press, which is the SSPX's publishing house, made commentary on the letters too. And they would say things like, well, clearly Cardinal Ratzinger is operating in bad faith here because of this and this and this. But that wasn't clear to me at all from reading the letter. It
Hmm.
was clear to me that the cardinal was in good faith. And so I read all the letters up until the pronouncement of excommunication, which was signed by Pope John Paul II,
Hmm.
not by some low level, jumped up bureaucrat. And that I knew I go back here. They are truly in schism. Whether or not they still are, I believe they have the spirit of schism in their hearts. And when you have that, you lose the protection of the Holy Spirit guiding you. And so that leads you into all of these weird areas and extremities. um, and the only place that I know that I must be is the Catholic Church. I'm not leaving it, even if it's, made, even if it's couched as being legitimate. The Catholic Church is the fold that we sheep need to be in. And I had to tell my mom that I was leaving because I had tried to leave several times before this, but she kept getting me. She would cry, and my mom doesn't cry. And I'd say, all right, I'll keep going there. But now that I knew for the first time that they were not in union with Rome, I knew I had to leave. And by the grace of God, this is all by the grace of God. And my mom had also made that decision independently of me
Hmm.
because my sister was about to get married and her husband was a new convert and hadn't been in the SSPX yet. And my mom was terrified of her being in an SSPX marriage. And that was her impetus for leaving. So both of us kind of came to that together and we left. But I lost my parish, all my friends, all my family members that were in it. Kind of, they didn't talk to us for 10 or 15 years afterwards.
Hmm.
I lost my home because the society had paid for that. I mean, I had to start completely from scratch.
It does sound like the
And
Amish a little bit because that's when I hear
yes,
stories of people leaving the Amish, family,
yeah,
friends, housing, they start over. Sometimes they don't even have birth certificates. So that's more extreme,
yes.
obviously, but
Oh, I know. It's
um
hard.
and
Fortunately, I
they're
was
yeah.
24 and I didn't mind, I went out to work as a, waitress and made quick, quick cash and that was fine. I mean, God brought me through it and he brought me to a Catholic um, psychologist who helped me tremendously and a new priest at our local church, local actual Catholic church. And they had both been to the Franciscan University of Steubenville and told me, go. It's wonderful. You'll love it. And I did. Sight unseen. I went and for 2 years and it was fantastic. And I got to meet men who were really Catholic, good men living the actual gospel. And it was like God put them in my life to heal me from all of those men who treated women like a subordinate slave. There was one, I was at a buffet lunch in California at Los Gatos Retreat Center in the society, and we were told, you ladies stand by your seats until the men have gone through the buffet line, and then after they're all done, then you can go and eat. I mean, that's like the inverse of every everything
Southern gentlemen or
I've ever. Yeah. So, he kind of healed me through good men. And then and now I just completed my master's in Catholic studies and I'm going to start writing. I've
Master
already
of
written
sorry.
some things. I'm going to write a book about my experience. Masters of Catholic Studies
Okay, Catholic
at
studies.
Franciscan University. Yes. And I want to say the trads love FUS because they think it's a trad university, and there are a lot of trads here, but there's every kind of Catholic here also. It's not like in one camp or another.
I
So
thought it
you'll
was more
find,
charismatic. I was always
oh, yes,
thought it
it
was
used to be. Yes, it used to be very
okay.
charismatic. And my first time I went there for my 2 years of my undergrad, it was charismatic, but not everyone was charismatic. There were still trads there then, and every other kind of Catholic too. And this time I've noticed that the charismatic movement has kind of not really so much present anymore. But you'll meet every kind of Catholic here. And it was a fantastic education that really taught me who God is. And I really want to share that with the world, and especially people who have only been taught these very, very traumatic, dark, dark things about God.
Hmm.
And the first time I read about someone who I kind of identified with was some of the women who left the FLDS, Warren
Yeah.
Jeffs, fundamentalist Latter-day
Latter-day
Saints.
Saints.
Yeah, and not everything. No one would chase you down and kill you or drag you back against your will. But we didn't, or we weren't invited to Christmas for 10 or 15 years either, after we left. So fortunately, God has healed us, and I believe that He will heal all of us in good faith. And I think that He will lead us out of these dark places. If we just cling to Him, He will deliver us.
Well, that is a great story, and I think it was well told. And I'm so glad that you are able to share it and to look back with that much, hindsight and wisdom on it of like what led you in and just being able to analyze it and now to be in a good place of a healthy relationship with the church and
Yes.
yeah, hopefully I'm in that same boat, just trying to move towards a being part of the mainstream church, trying to, submit yourself to kind of the general views of the church and direction of the church, and not try to
Mhm.
forge my own path like a lot of the trads. They know better than the
Mhm.
what the magisterium's actually saying and what their bishop's actually saying. I
Oh,
mean,
yes.
they do have
Yes.
some points here and there where there are things that are
Mhm.
being ironed out after the council. Like I said, it might take a while. You get random the charismatic movement pops up and then goes away. You'll probably get, some
Yeah.
bad St. Louis Jesuits music pops up and then has to probably go away. But those kind of
And it's
things will
been like
happen
that.
as,
Yes, it's been like that since the beginning of the church. Even St. Augustine was writing against heresies in his age. And so the church will always weather these storms. But if the SSPX humbled themselves, see, they believe truly that they are the way that the Holy Spirit is guiding the church
hmm,
through them. And they believe that they're holding the tradition until such time as Rome repents. Then Rome will be able to learn from the SSPX how to do things, and the SSPX will then lead us into what God has planned for us.
well,
So they don't
yeah,
see themselves as submitting themselves to Rome, but rather Rome converting. But
yeah.
these things are not told to you when you start. I learned them after 7 years of experience.
What will be interesting
And
is
the
to
guidance of
see
God.
if they can still look at it that way after their bishops are gone, because they have those bishops
Oh,
left
I
over.
know.
And then when they're gone, you can have valid, even if not licit, masses if you have these valid priests that were, um, consecrated through a bishop, and those four had been bishops, so that was maybe,
Hmm.
I don't know, but if those bishops go away, and then it's kind of a inflection point for them where they have to decide, are we going to just create our own institution and structure and process of making bishops and priests and all that, or like the
Oh,
rest of the church has to get bishops approved by the Pope. Are we going to,
yes.
because that says a lot. If you they're not really any ambiguity about whether they're part of the Catholic Church or not at that point is not at all ambiguous.
It,
They're just
yes. It
making their
might
own bishops
be.
out of thin air.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they need a lot of prayers for them because, I care about them. These were my friends and still are my friends and family in this group. In They're not priests, but
Yeah.
they're de facto in the society. And I do pray for them, and I hope that they will be led back to the church in fullness. And, if they had done that all along, they could really have helped the church not go to these extremes of mass abuses.
Yes.
If they had the fullness of the faith, the letter of the law, but founded on the spirit of the law, they could have done a great thing for the church. But, just because a mass is licit, and if it's just because it's valid, but if it's not okay to go there, if it's an illicit mass, it's
Yeah.
sacrilegious.
I think your
And that
point
was,
there is, I've thought about this so many times, and I know trads hate when people say this, but if you all would have just stayed within the church, if you all would just stay within your parishes and not church shop for some strip mall 3 hours away, that has something
mhm,
more beautiful. If you'd go to your local parish and be a balancing force, if there's something weird going on and they're dressing like clowns, be be that person there. It's like, hey, what about Gregorian chant?
yeah,
Do it in charity and a spirit of cooperation and obedience. But it's good to have the sides. If everybody who likes
mhm,
tradition and all of that disappears and does their own thing, yeah, things are gonna
yeah,
get a little more weird, and maybe certain parishes need that. Maybe your local parish is what I would say as a closing message to any traditionalists watching this.
mhm,
Maybe your local parish needs your love of tradition, your reverence in the mass, and you could,
mhm,
instead of trying to form a schola way far away, try to join the choir and have a good influence on it and lead it in a direction of reverence and beauty and all of those things.
mhm.
And I think that would be a much healthier way for the church to heal and to normalize, is to pour yourself into your local parish and contribute in that way. But I don't know if you have
Yes,
any last
absolutely.
thoughts.
No, I agree with everything you said, and thank you for talking with me, and I'm so encouraged by what you're doing, and I'm really looking forward to the next steps for the church.
Absolutely. Well,
hopefully
thank you,
with the
Cassandra, and
society reconciled.
absolutely. Well, thanks again for being with me.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye. All right.